watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi seeks better relations with Japan in a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister and Foreign Minister in the Japanese capital. Could better trade relations between Beijing and Tokyo be effective against the U.S. tariffs? What about the political relationship between the two countries? Our panel weigh in right after this break. You are watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on his first official visit to Japan, meeting Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Foreign Minister Taro. The two sides discussed economic cooperation, relations between China and Japan, and the territorial disputes in the East China Sea. China and Japan are holding high-level economic talks this week as well, for the very first time in 8 years.
China and Japan pledged a new starting point for bilateral ties during the bilateral meeting between Wang and Abe. Both say they are looking forward to work together on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Wang stressed a trade war will harm the global economy.
Trade protectionism is rising, and as a result, the framework of free trade is under threat. The rise of unilateralism is challenging the basic international rules. We have relative stability in our region, and we need to appreciate that. The relationship between China and Japan should be part of this positive trend of peace and security.
Wang and his Japanese counterpart Taro co-chaired high-level economic talks, the first since 2010. They agreed to continue to improve relations. Kono said Japan may work with China on projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. Both sides also talked about promoting the economic integration of East Asia, speed up negotiations on the China-Japan-South Korea free trade.
For more on the relations between China and Japan, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Japan and China-Japan relations, we are joined in our Beijing studio Rong Ying, the Vice President of CIIS, the China Institute of International Studies. Mr. Rong, also former Minister Councilor at the Chinese Embassy in Japan from the year 2011 to 2016. Those were some of the rocky years, I have to say. Mr. Rong, welcome back. In Washington, D.C., we are joined by Yoshikazu Kato, who is a research fellow at the Chahar Institute and a columnist of the New York Times Chinese web edition. Welcome as well. I want to begin with you, Mr. Rong. After experiencing those rocky years, as I mentioned in the introduction, how do you see this apparent warming up of relations between China and Japan? After all, the foreign ministers met. After all, the Chinese foreign minister and state councilor meeting the prime minister of Japan.
We are indeed, I think we are happy to see this development in the bilateral relationship. State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, despite the fact he was the ambassador to Japan, and this is the first official visit as a foreign minister when he took over in 2013. And it is the second visit, actually, for Wang Yi himself. Back in 2016, he visited Japan, but not at a bilateral, just meant for the trilateral meeting.
Right, and not as state councilor either.
Exactly, exactly. So this is indeed a very important visit, and it's going to pave for the improvement of the relationship.
Well, this year is also 40th anniversary of China-Japan signing the Treaty on Friendship and Cooperation. So, peace and friendship, rather. So, will this opportunity, Mr. Rong, be taken great advantage by both sides? What does it take to do so?
I think the two sides have expressed their readiness and to make good use of this opportunity to further improve the relationship and to put the relationship on a more solid basis. But of course, they are also aware there are challenges. And as Minister Wang Yi made it very clear that there are some complicated and sensitive issues to take out. So that's why I think the two sides has extended, I think, in-depth dialogue and looking at the possible areas where the relationship could be expanded and work on. That is economic and trade relationship.
Economic and trade relations. Before we go to the details of that, Mr. Kato, when you see relationship cool down, when you see relationship warm up, it usually takes a lot of changes in the regional and international issues for the two countries to realize they have to make a change from their previous position. Mr. Kato, what is your observation about the dramatic changes that's going on right now that would bring these two countries once again back together, at least to a certain extent?
Yes, I agree. I think now Japan-China relationship is cooling down and warming up. And because now looking at the reality, now we have a 40th anniversary. This is a really important year. So for Japan and China, both of us, we have enough motivation to improve our relationship. And now we are looking at outside, what's happening outside bilateral relationship. Korean Peninsula, U.S.-China relationship, I think now the situation is getting more complicated. So Japan and China, we need to each other. So that's why, you know, from outside inside, we have enough motivation to improve our relationship. So this is a very good starting point, as Foreign Minister Wang Yi said. But I think it shouldn't be a one-time event. You know, we need to establish the mechanism, you know, I mean, upcoming Premier Li Keqiang visit to Japan, and possibly the Shinzo Abe Japanese Prime Minister visit to China, and possibly, you know, President Xi Jinping's visit to China next year. So we hope, as a Japanese public citizen, we hope, you know, this kind of mechanism could be going on.
Well, a long list of hope you have given out, Mr. Kato, I have to say, in the short answer. But for now, let's take a look at some of the points you just mentioned. Mr. Rong, about the DPRK issue. Of course, Japan was not necessarily being previously informed when the U.S. president talking about a meeting with the head of the DPRK. Meanwhile, we also see Japan was one of the only allies of the United States which has not been exempted from the tariffs when it comes to steel and aluminum. So how will all of these things added up together eventually make Japan think about its relation with Washington and therefore also think about its relation with some of the regional powers such as China? Mr. Rong.
Well, I think regional issues like the North Korea's nuclear issues and also the trade issues certainly, I think, played a very important role in Abe administration's policy towards China and the United States. But I would like to make a point that for the bilateral relationship between China and Japan, the most important thing, I think, lies in the dynamic of the relationship itself. I think the Foreign Minister Wang Yi made it very clear. I think his visit is a kind of response to a serious positive moves made by the Japanese government, Prime Minister Abe in particular, and his visit is also as a major step towards a steady improvement of the relationship. But of course, I think regional issues, North Korea's nuclear issues, is important for Japan and certainly for China. And for Japan, I can understand that it has a very big concern, that is the abduction issues. And even though I think a lot of people would argue that this is an issue that could be better managed through bilateral means, but I can understand that Japan, as a member of six-party talks and has concerns. Trade issues, again, important for Japan, for China, and for the region world at large. There's a consensus, I think, during the visit. Two leaders expressed their common understanding that it has to be dealt with according to the rules centered with WTO. So I think there are very important area for the cooperation.
Okay, there we go. From the Chinese side, what about from the Japan side? I mean, we see the messages have been be able to be communicated over the past few months between the two sides. Mr. Kato, what do you think is the key issue that made Japan come back to realize this relationship is extremely important, and also it should take some efforts to make it come back again, Mr. Kato?
I think at this moment, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe met with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. And I think this means a positive and strong message for Japan to make a point of the Japan-China relationship. And I'm sure for Chinese government, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, or Chinese more stronger efforts in international community, this would be really important for China and Japan. If possible, we could support something as much as we can. And I think like our leaders previously confirmed, we need to make sure we shouldn't threaten to each other. We should make a commitment to regional stability and prosperity. And I think at this moment we surely assured this recognition. We can work together. We can move forward together. So this is a really important message to the to China-Japan relationship.
Well, 2018, as we said, marks the 40th anniversary China-Japan Peace and Friendship Treaty. A month after meeting the Chinese President Xi Jinping at the APEC meetings last year, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said he is willing to take Japan-China relations to a new level. Abe said that he hopes to increase cooperation and communication with China, including the Belt and Road Initiative, as you just mentioned. Meanwhile, bilateral visits by President Xi and Prime Minister Abe are also being planned at this point. And as Tokyo battles to stay relevant on the Korean Peninsula issue, Japan is also pushing to host a trilateral meeting among Prime Ministers Abe, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, and South Korean President Moon Jae-in. These are things that are going on right now, but we do not know whether they will be able to be realized. So that is the thing that we have to talk about, Mr. Rong. From now to the roadmap that both of you have been talking about, what exactly does it take?
Well, I think at this moment, certainly we have to go further along the what we have agreed, that is the reached out of this visit. I think so far as we can see that this is a successful visit. It has strengthened the mutual trust, and it also has I think increased the consensus, and I believe it will also agree that we have to work together to manage differences so that the momentum of this improving the relationship will be maintained. And
but Mr. Rong, it's wonderful to say all these beautiful words and wonderful to put out all these hopes, but is there something like a barometer that we can check on the road ahead about what have been done right, so that we know the next thing can be done or has the hope of being implemented? Mr. Rong, what would be that thing for the very near future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the first, of course, the first and foremost is that the forthcoming trilateral meetings between the three countries. So Premier Li Keqiang is, planned to visit Japan, and it is most likely they would also visit and do a bilateral official visit, which is again the first ever visit for a Chinese premier in I think in six years. No, 7 years. So this is going to be a significant event for the bilateral relationship. And during the visit, I believe that there will also agreement would be reached how to further and explore the concrete way of implementing the consensus,
right.
Particularly in economic trade issues. Again, at the high level economic dialogue, and we have already learned that there are many agreements and that to further the relationship and also specific areas. Certainly Belt and Road Initiative is one of them,
right.
But we have to, again, work on and see what we can come out.
But Mr. Kato, also in the Japanese political hemisphere, you have your own limits, you also have your own space to be explored. To what extent can these topics be explored? The Belt and Road Initiative, for example, economic further cooperation with China, and the regional issues with China. To what extent can the Abe administration administration now be able to explore those space? Mr. Kato, your judgment.
Yes, I think the roadmap initiative, I think for Japan, we need some time and process to learning and understanding what is the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think it should be a long-term process to be a commitment. But I think I have figured out when Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Shinzo Abe, our Prime Minister, he pointed out we should strengthen our cooperation outside of the bilateral relationship. I mean, our commitment to the third countries and region. I think this would be a very important point in concrete cooperation. For example, we are looking at Latin America, Southeast Asia. Perhaps we need to implement some joint investment or some joint cooperation project in outside of the Japan-China relationship. And this could be some kind of confidence building process for Japan and China. It means Japan-China, we should be responsible more for the region's prosperity and stability. This is more than bilateral relationship, and this would be a very important step for strengthening Japan-China relationship.
I see. Mr. Rong, before we go, very briefly to respond to your Japanese colleague. Earlier we see investment in Africa, in Latin America, and some of the other regions have seen some, quote, competition between China and Japan. Can the two countries turn, quote, competition into cooperation? Mr. Rong, very briefly from you.
I think competition is all right. I mean, as long as healthy competitions. And living in this world, competitive world, I think we certainly will have to live with kind of competition. With that Belt and Road Initiative, I think China has always welcomed the participation of Japan. The only problem, as I think our colleagues mentioned, that it seems that still at this moment to have some hesitation or reservation. And we only hope that Japan, with the business community actually, as far as I know, they are very enthusiastic, come out and more enthusiastically and working together with China for that. But bilateral relations are always important. Yeah, a political relationship and also economic trade. I think the new areas, as I mentioned. Let us hope that this is a new beginning. Certainly it will be more promising, and we hope that the relationship will be on more steady and healthy
We are running out of time. For now, I want to thank both of you, Rong Ying and Yoshikazu Kato. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. China-Japan relations, very fascinating. We see the warm-up of it over the past few days. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.